Folks, welcome back to another episode of The Fallen Badge. Today we're going to look at the murder of Sergeant Nick Risner, Sheffield, Alabama Police Department. Folks, Sergeant Risner was 40 years old. Now, he'd been with Sheffield Police Department about 9 years. He'd been in the U.S. Army Reserves, National Guard. Now, he had a wife and a daughter. Now, all this is going to take place in the city of Sheffield, and then in the adjoining town of Muscle Shoals. Now, Sergeant Risner, as you can tell from the picture I'm using, he was a canine officer. Now, as much as he was loved by the community, the dastardly villain in this episode was as bad as anybody we've ever talked about on any of these episodes. He'd done time in prison for killing his own daddy. And before we get done with this episode, we're going to see he's going to kill his alleged friend. And that's just a warm-up for shooting two officers from Sheffield, one a lieutenant who survived, and then Sergeant Risner who did not. Now, folks, this no-account fella, this is going to come as no shock when I tell you that he should have still been in prison. Now, way back in 2011, about 10 years before he's going to murder two more people, he shot and killed his daddy over some money his daddy owed him, allegedly. So now he shoots his daddy to death out there in the front yard of his daddy's house. And he gets indicted. On a murder charge, and he's facing 20 years to life. Well, for whatever reason, the prosecutor and the defense attorney decided to cut a deal. So he pled guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to 10 years. Now, I can't even count the number of times I've told y'all that getting sentenced to 10 years don't mean you're going to do 10 years. Well, that's what happened here. Now, he went into prison with that 10-year sentence. And he was back out in 3 years. Now, the media, one of the news organizations, I believe it was CBS 42, they decided to find out. And they found out, like a lot of us already know, that the prison system, I don't care what state you're in, is a mess. And they're not interested in keeping people behind bars. All they're worried about is overcrowding. So they let out murderers and rapists and every violent criminal you can think of. But anyways, after they jumped through all the hoops that the Alabama Penal Institute put him through. They did a little figuring on his being released early on good time. Now, their math, that the numbers didn't add up. Now, this news agency found all kinds of disciplinary incidents involving this fella while he was in prison. So in other words, it's just a bunch of mess. Alabama just let him out just like the rest of the states do. Even by their own standards, he sure shouldn't have got out after 3 years. And considering that he was a violent offender, he should have been made to do all his time. It's what you should do with violent offenders. But they didn't hear. And I promise you, whatever state you live in, they ain't doing it there either. October 1st, 2021. 1:44 p.m. Police dispatchers in Muscle Shoals put out a call to officers, advised they had received a 911 call, said a person had fallen from a moving vehicle on Avalon Avenue.
Muscle Shoals Rescue need a response in the area of State Street and Avalon.
And the caller clarified the information by saying that the individual had not fallen from the vehicle, they had been pushed from the vehicle. Now, the original dispatch location was Avalon near State. So officers make the scene. The actual body is found east of the Avalon State location. They see that the victim's got traumatic head injury. Now, they originally called for the life flight to make the scene, but then they realized that the victim was dead. And not just dead, he'd been shot in the top of the head. Now, later on, the medical examiner would say the bullet went through the top of the head and traveled into the chest area of the victim. Now, a few minutes after that, police get a call, say there's been a hit-and-run accident at Avalon and Woodward. Now, that's allegedly about a quarter of a mile from where the body was found in the street. And the victim who was on the scene had gotten a picture of the vehicle that was involved, and they showed it to the police. Well, now that vehicle was the victim's truck. So now a broadcast is put out telling officers to be on the lookout for a gray F-150 Ford pickup driven by a male white.
All units, solo from Muscle Shoals Police Department for a gray F-150 driven by a white male, last seen eastbound on Avalon Avenue, just involved in a homicide on Avalon Avenue.
Now that same broadcast is then put out by Sheffield Police Department, Tuscumbia, all the departments right there in that area, because those three cities all bump up together. Now, they did notice on the victim in the street that he had a pistol holster on, but it was empty. And the fact he was shot in the head tells the police that the person in this vehicle may or may not have shot the victim with his own gun, or at the very least shot him with another gun and took the victim's gun. Now they know he was last seen heading westbound on Avalon, which would mean he's heading towards Sheffield. Now the family of the victim in the street would later say that the victim was prone to having seizures, so he liked to have somebody drive him around. And come to find out, his really close friend was the suspect. So this suspect has shot his daddy to death, and now he shot what's considered one of his close friends. Now about 40 minutes after the shooting, and about 10 minutes after the broadcast is put out, Sheffield police spot the gray F-150 pickup truck, and they begin a pursuit.
Sheffield in pursuit of that vehicle this time.
Subject taking a left onto Avalon. Be advised, we're about to cross into Muscle Shoals on Avalon. Continuing east on Avalon, passing Walmart. Speed 40 miles an hour. Just entering a parking lot at Ruby Tuesday.
Now the pursuit comes down South Montgomery. Suspect in the vehicle hangs a left and he goes back eastbound on Avalon. And they go back into the city limits of Muscle Shoals. Now he runs along Avalon and he ends up hanging a left and going northbound through the Southgate Mall. Now I don't know at what point Sergeant Risner got involved in the chase, maybe from the beginning. In fact, he might have been the pursuit vehicle. The resource material doesn't state who the primary vehicle in the pursuit was. But in any event, suspect drives behind the Southgate Mall, which would be the north side of those buildings. So now he's traveling west, and at that point, Sergeant Risner does a pit maneuver. Now, just based on the damage I saw on Sergeant Risner's SUV, it looks like he took the right front side of his vehicle and would have tapped what would have to be the left rear of the pickup truck and put it in a spin. Now, pickup truck swings around, does a 180. So now the truck comes to a stop and it's facing back eastbound. Sergeant Risner, his vehicle would be on the driver's side of the pickup truck. His front end and the front end of Sergeant Risner's SUV would have been about even with the driver's side door of the suspect vehicle. So that would put Sergeant Risner at an slight angle to the suspect. And another police SUV pulls up on the driver's side of Sergeant Risner. There's also, I saw a motor officer's motorcycle, and I also saw another squad car that had pulled in and had blocked the truck. Now at this point, the suspect starts cranking off rounds. Now Sergeant Risner evidently got hit before he could clear his vehicle, because the distance, as you see in the crime scene pictures I've got, it was fairly close. Now the resource material says that the round that hit Sergeant Risner came through the windshield. I don't know how many other rounds he fired into Sergeant Risner's vehicle. Now the lieutenant from Sheffield, he came around the passenger side of Sergeant Risner's SUV and engaged the suspect. So now I take it that the lieutenant was probably standing somewhere around the right front wheel of Sergeant Risner's vehicle and was firing. Now the lieutenant got hit twice in the Kevlar vest and he goes down. And he puts out the call, he's been hit. Now multiple officers fire and the suspect is hit multiple times. But of course the suspect doesn't die. Now initially they thought only the lieutenant had been hit, Now, of course, even getting hit in the vest, the blunt trauma from that going to leave some nasty bruises, so the lieutenant's going to get transported to the hospital. But after a couple of minutes, they realized that Sergeant Risner's been hit as well. Now, the round that caused the death of Sergeant Risner, the bullet went near the area of the armpit where the vest doesn't cover, which would tell you that Sergeant Risner was bladed off, probably had maybe his left shoulder area or something facing the suspect when the round started going off. And again, we see another officer that dies from a round that gets in around the armpit, because once it gets in there, then it's going to traverse the body. Now, Sergeant Risner is flown by the Life Flight helicopter up to Huntsville, and he dies the next day. Now, inside the vehicle, the suspect vehicle, they found a Smith & Wesson 9mm handgun and a .45 caliber Ruger handgun. Now, both those weapons belonged to the shooting victim on Avalon, who the suspect murdered. Now, the suspect had a loaded 9mm magazine in his pocket, and he had the .45 in his hand. That's what he was firing with after he got through with the 9mm. Now, the 9mm pistol was found in the passenger floorboard with an empty magazine and chamber. Now, the police would say later they found one spent .45 shell casing and 17 spent 9mm shell casings in the truck. Now, when he got indicted, the suspect is indicted on 4 counts of capital murder, and those 4 counts, that'd be 2 applying to the victim he shot and threw out on the street, and the other 2 counts on Sergeant Risner. Now, he's also charged with 3 counts of attempted murder, 3 counts of shooting into an occupied vehicle, convicted felon in possession of a handgun, and abuse of a court. So it's a total of about 12 charges. Now, there was some good came out of this. It's unfortunate that the government has to wait until after a police officer dies before they do something. But Alabama had passed a law, it was called the Good Time Law, which said that if you were an inmate, if you behaved yourself while you were in jail, well, they'd let you out early as a reward. Now, unfortunately, this good time law covered everybody, and it shouldn't have. Violent offenders should never be eligible for good time. But anyways, Governor Ivey signed the bill. It's called the Nick Risner Act. And what it said was that if you use a deadly weapon to kill someone, that you're not eligible to be released early. Now, I think that law is way too specific. It should just say if you're a violent offender, you're not eligible for good time. Sergeant James Nicholas Nick Risner. End of watch, October 2nd, 2021.